Now let's see each of the determinants in detail, right? So as we have seen that the first determinant was source, right? Whether the particular source of that particular action was just or not, that shall decide the rightness or wrongness of an action, right? So it is on the basis of source which decides the rightness or wrongness of the action. That is the first determinant, that is the source. And as we have seen in the introduction, that source is of two types, that is internal source and external source, right? Internal source and external source. And external source comprised of what? All the external aspects like law, like the provisions or norms in society, right, religion and etc. And we have already seen all these aspects in greater clarity in just the previous lecture, right? You don't have to scroll much, just scroll a lecture back and start lecture number 4. You will get all the understanding of law and ethics, society, that is value and ethics, and you will be able to deal with this concept effectively. In today's lecture, we will mainly see the internal sources, that is conscience, right, which is very important to decide the rightness or wrongness of an action, right? So let's see what a conscience is, right? So let's see what a conscience is. So conscience is internal moral faculty which judge the rightness or wrongness of an action. So the first point is conscience is internal moral faculty. Why internal moral faculty? Because it tells us whatever we are doing is right or wrong, right? This is called as antar atma in Hindi. अंतर आत्मा इन हिंदी, राइट? अगर आप ऐसा कुछ करते हैं जो आपकी अंतर आत्मा स्वीकार नहीं कर रहा है, वो एक्ट एथिकल नहीं होगा, राइट? वो एक्ट जस्ट नहीं होगा. एंड दिस इज वेयर द अंतर आत्मा और कॉन्शियंस कम, राइट? सो कॉन्शियंस इज इंटरनल मोरल फैकल्टी विच जज द राइटनेस और wrongness of an action, right? For example, in certain case, if I have to tell a lie, right, and let leave the concept of lie or truth. If I have to say something which is against the welfare of the people, which is against my moral conscience, then that particular act will be unethical for me and also for the society at large, right? But the important here is self. The important here is self, because here the conscience is the internal moral faculty of the self. It is the first guide or first faculty which judge whether any action was right or wrong. So antar atma is a what? The first source, right? Inner sense of right or wrong in one's action. It is an inner sense, right? Why sense? Because it will make you feel in certain manner if you are acting in a certain way which is against your conscience, right? For example, the very clear manifestation is that whenever you will, let's say, try lying, or whenever you will try doing something wrong, you will kind of blabber while doing that, right? So वी सी सर्टेन सेट ऑफ पीपल. हमारे फ्रेंड्स ग्रुप में एक तो जरूर होता है जो हमेशा अच्छे से झूठ नहीं बोल पाता, राइट? वाइल सेइंग ही विल काइंड ऑफ ब्लेबर, he will kind of what? He will kind of fluctuate in his tone, right? We can see certain fluctuation or discrepancy while he is speaking, and at that point we can catch that person that he is lying, right? Irrespective of the cause or result, right? So it is an inner sense. It will make you feel certain way. It will make you realize that you are not doing in certain manner, right? And in this case it becomes a inner sense of a right or wrong in one's action, right? Internal source of ethical guidance. So conscience is the first and internal source of ethical guidance, right? Everything is external, right? Every other things become external. Law, religion, ethics, guide, morality, values, belief, faith, and etc. Everything becomes external source, but only conscience, that is our reason, is the internal source of ethical guidance, right? Which is inherent in us, right? So remember the most beautiful statement of Gandhiji, who says that don't do if it offends your conscience, right? This is the concept of law of conscience of Gandhiji, right? Law of conscience of Gandhiji, which is a moral law of moral ethics of Gandhiji, right? So this is a doctrine of law of moral conscience or ethics of Gandhiji, which says that don't do if it offends your conscience, because that act which defends your conscience shall always be wrong, shall always be unethical, right? Right? On what basis he says that? He says so because he considers conscience as to be the purest form of the self, right? Why purest form of the self? Because it is a product of God, it is a product of God, right? God has made conscience or instilled a sense of conscience in man, and hence conscience is the purest form of God in man, right? Purest form of God in man, and hence we all become the part of God, right? We all become the part of God. And Gandhiji, in his work that is Hind Swaraj, he says that if all human beings start working as per their conscience, right? Let me clear the board. So Gandhiji, in his work that is Hind Swaraj, he says that if all individuals, right, act as per their conscience, right, we shall achieve Ram Rajya, right? What was Ram Rajya? It is a concept of Gandhiji's dharma state, right? It is a concept of Gandhiji's just state, right? And as he says that being conscience being part of God, which is pristine in nature, and if individuals bound to work as per their conscience, the state of Ram Rajya can be attained, right? Which will be just, right? So here let's see this. In matter of conscience, the law of majority has no effect, right? This is how beautifully Gandhiji shows or explicit the importance of conscience. When the idea of conscience comes, all the laws of majority, that is external sources, right? What can be the law of majority? The first is law itself, the second is the norms in society, the third are various beliefs, faiths, institution, etc. This all are the law of majority, has no effect, right? Because conscience is the internal source of ethical guidance, right? So remember this profound statement which says that don't do if it offends your conscience, right? And hence this is the first source or the first determinant of the ethical action in the human beings, that is conscience, right? Which is an internal source upon which we shall decide the rightness or wrongness of an action, right? And right, so now let's see this particular concept which says that when should we take the help of conscience in bureaucracy, right? Being conscience, very implicit term, very vast term, very sometimes even vague as well, because in case of bureaucracy one always have to work objectively, right? Objectively, But here we have seen that even a conscience can be a ground for the judgment of rightness or wrongness of an action. One can when can one resort to the conscience in bureaucracy, right? When should we take the help of conscience in bureaucracy? So there are certain conditions which decides whether should we resort to the help of conscience or not. So the first condition is, when can we take the help of conscience? Whenever there is absence, whenever there is an absence of laws or rules, regulations, right? Whenever there is no laws, no rules, no regulation, one will always resort to the help of conscience, right? As we all know that bureaucracy always works under the framework of objectivity, right? What is objectivity? Objectivity is basically laws, right? That you have to act in certain manner because it is decided, the procedure and courts are already decided, and hence the action becomes objective, right? But what if in certain situation there is no objectivity, there is no law, there is no rules, there is no regulation, and in society sometimes certain situation arises, right, where one have to resort to certain action which is beyond laws, beyond regulations, and beyond rules sometimes, right? Let's say for example during the time of disaster, right? During the time of disaster, when there is a emergency, where there is an emergency and you find no rules, no laws and etc about that, right? Let's say there are few set of people who are drowning in an inundated river, right? And there is no rules or procedure how to save them. You just see a boat here which is lying idle, right? Which is lying idle, and your conscience supports your idea that now the life of these drowning people, the drowning people who can be saved is if this particular boat will be used, right? And hence without the permission of the owner, the individual, he takes the boat to save the life of drowning people, right? And hence he has to use the or take the help of his conscience to decide, right? Some people will set no will be kind of a opinion that no, taking this vote without permission will be unethical, and let the people die, but I will not resort to the unethical practices, right? They will be basically the deontological or Kantian school of people, right, who will basically believe in the purity of means, and in no circumstances they will resort to the unethical practices. But here conscience comes into play in order to have a good cause. Whenever there is no laws, no rules and no regulation about something, right, and here individual have to resort to the idea of or take the help of conscience. I am hoping that you guys are understanding the concept, right? Keep on taking the notes as well side by side. The second situation where one can take the help of conscience is basically whenever there is a situation to use the discretionary power in bureaucracy or in administration, right? So let's say there are two individual A and individual B, right? They have come with a particular problem, right? Let's say a particular piece of land, right? A is a wealthy businessman, right? But B is a poor farmer, agricultural farming lady, right, who do not have any other source of sustenance other than this agricultural land, right? Now they both come to a administrator or collector claiming this particular piece of land, right? They say that A says that this particular land belongs to me, but B says that no, this particular land belongs to me. And since there is no document to prove that, right, here the collector or authority will have a discretionary power to do justice to both of them, right? And here they can take the help of their conscience, right? Collector will take into the consideration the both the situation of A and B, right? He will take into the consideration his conscience will say his conscience will say that A is a wealthy person. He will ought to have other sources of sustenance as well. But if I will not assign, if not completely, even partly, this piece of agricultural land to this lady B, she will not have any other source of sustenance, and hence her life will be impacted. Her life will be impacted, right? And in such discretionary situation where discretionary powers ought to be used, the resort of help of conscience becomes very important, right? Remember such bureaucratic examples as well. I have been in the system, I have seen the system from my from my very close experience, and I am elucidating all these examples from the experience itself. And when one becomes a bureaucrat, all such problems are bound to come. It is very much related to land, revenue, disputes, and etc., right? So this is how, if you guys are aware about all these problems, you will be able to quote these examples very effectively in the answer and do justice to your answer, right? So my entire teaching is from a bureaucratic perspective, not from a particular or normal preaching perspective, right? I am kind of shaping your mind to see concepts from very bureaucratic perspective, because you are going to be a bureaucrat where understanding of particular situation from a bureaucratic mindset becomes very important, right? So now let's see the third situation. Okay, now let's see the third situation, one where the resort of help of conscience can be taken into the consideration. The third situation is to defend the progressive humanitarian value. To defend the progressive humanitarian values, right? Values. Let's say there is a bureaucrat, or you are a bureaucrat posted in certain remote location of Rajasthan, right? And there you hear a case of child marriage which will be conducted in Masse, right? There will be a community child marriage which shall be taking place in later date, right? And someone in your office brought this particular issue to your notice, right? Which is against the progressive humanitarian values, right? The values of child autonomy, the values of child development, fosterness, and etc. shall be violated, right? And here being the values of that particular society, right? Because child marriage is a kind of traditional customs values that is prevalent in certain part of our country, that is true, right? And since it is a kind of violation of progressive humanitarian values, sometimes though it might not be mentioned in the objective laws and rules and regulation, one have to resort to the help of conscience to stop or defend the progressive humanitarian values, right? So that the good can be achieved in the society. Good can be achieved in the society. The justice can be established in the society, right? So this is, sometimes we have to resort to the help of conscience in order to defend the progressive humanitarian values, right? If something or a malicious practice of corruption is taking place, right? Corruption is taking place, and as we all know that this is against the progressive humanitarian value, here we can take the help of our conscience Even if we don't take the help of our conscience will for sure nudge us that no, this is something against humanity, this is something against the progressive humanitarian value, and here the bureaucrat will strive his best or her best in order to stop such malicious practices in the society, right? And here the help of conscience becomes very important to defend the progressive humanitarian values, right? So this was the third situation. What is the fourth situation? At the time of disaster, at the time of disaster or crisis, right? So why the help of conscience becomes very important during this time? Because during the time of crisis, the results becomes very important, the results and execution become very important. Here the laws and etc take a backstage, right? Laws, rules, regulations and etc they takes backstage, right? And once these objective laws, rules, regulations are eliminated, one has to take the help of conscience or reason, right? And here the help of conscience becomes very important in bureaucracy during the time of disaster or crisis, right? So this was the fourth situation. The fifth situation and the last situation is when there is no sufficient data, when there is no sufficient data or facts or guidelines to take a decision, right? The example I have given regarding the land allocation, right, to a and B who was wealthy and B was a poor lady. Here there is no sufficient data, facts or guidelines to decide whether that particular piece of land belonged to A or B, right? And here the bureaucrat can resort to the help of his conscience. If the intent will be good, if the cause will be good, then that particular action shall always be justified on the moral grounds, right? So this was the idea behind when a bureaucrat can take the help of conscience in bureaucracy, right? I'm hoping that you guys are enjoying the lecture, right? Now let's see the second determinant. The first determinant which we have seen is the sources. In sources we have already seen the external sources, that is law, norms, values, society and etc in the previous lecture. In this lecture we have seen one very important internal source, that was conscience, right? Conscience. Now let's see the second determinant, which becomes the consequentialism, teleological or result orientation, right? So basically we decide the justness or rightness or wrongness of any action on the basis of consequence, on the basis of teleology, on the basis of result, right? So let's see each of them in very detail. So the rightness and wrongness of an action, when it is decided on the basis of result, it is known as what? The consequentialism or teleological determinant of ethics, right? So always remember the basic idea behind the consequentialism or the result determinant of ethical theory, the idea of greatest happiness of greatest number is taken into the consideration. They say that if any action leads to the result of greatest happiness of greatest number, then that particular action shall be right action, that shall be considered as a right action, right? So but before coming to this conclusion, this is the end result, right? If an action which leads to the greatest happiness of greatest number, then that act shall be considered right. But on what basis the consequentialists are deciding or coming to this particular idea that if there is a greatest happiness of greatest number, then that particular act shall be right, right? So the basic principle behind the consequentialism is hedonism, right? What is idea of hedonism? The idea of hedonism basically says that the justice of an action or the just action is decided on the basis of pleasure and pain, right? So all the consequentialist, the advocate of consequentialism like Bentham, Mill, mill, etc. They propound the idea that men act in a way so as to satiate their sense of pleasure, or to be specific, the physiological physiological hedonism physiological hedonism. They propound the idea of physiological hedonism, where he says that men ought to work if it produces immense pleasure, right? So this is the basic idea behind coming to the conclusion that if any action is right, if it leads to or results into the greatest happiness of the greatest number. But now let's see a concept of consequentialism or hedonism in greater depth, right? So here even the hedonism, right, the idea of hedonism is of two types. Even hedonism is classified further, right? So whenever we say the term pleasure, always it is kind of negative in our brain, right? It something negative is reflected or comes to our mind. But there is always a difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure and happiness, right? Pleasure and happiness. And this is how we are also differentiating. In this consequentialism or determinant, we will always be taking into the consideration the happiness and not the pleasure, right? Why not pleasure? Let's see some of the difference between the term pleasure and happiness. Most of people tend to confuse between these terms, and they tend to use it very interchangeably often, but this is not one of the same, right? There is a huge difference between the term pleasure and happiness. So what is the difference between the term pleasure and happiness? So pleasure is very physical pleasure. It is very much confined to or limited to physical pleasure, sensual pleasure. But happiness is something beyond physical. It is a psychic. It is a spiritual. It is a spiritual pleasure, right? The spiritual happiness or spiritual satisfaction is basically happiness, right? Pleasure is very limited. Why, right? Limited to what? Limited to only physical aspects. But happiness is eternal. Happiness is never ending. It is eternal, right? So pleasure is gross. It is only limited to the bodily aspects, right? The gross, the mass. But here the happiness is basically what? It is basically refined. It is very refined in nature. What does this mean? It is refined over a period of time to have this eternal sense of happiness in a either psychic or spiritual essence, right? So this is what a difference between pleasure and happiness is. So just to establish the idea that the consequential school, we will deal with each and every of this concept when we talk about the moral thinkers, and we will talk we will see the ideas of Bentham, Mill, etc., and it will for sure help you have a greater clarity. But now for the sake of learning the idea of determinants, we have to understand this particular concept of hedonism, right? So one of the PYQs was even asked that in today's day everyone is aspiring for happiness. Do you agree? If you do agree, then what is happiness means to you? Give with example or answer with example, right? So here we have to take the concept of happiness or pleasure in its entirety to answer such questions, right? Happiness or pleasure is not always negative. It is sometimes very eternal, positive as well when we talk about the term of happiness, right? So let's decode the idea of happiness. So here hedonism is further classified into two classifications. The first is egoistic hedonism, and second is altruistic hedonism. What? Altruistic hedonism. hedonism, right? So as by just having a glimpse of this term egoistic hedonism, most of you might have already understood it, that egoistic hedonism is something which is concerned with our own self, right? It is basically satiating the egoistic needs or pleasure of the individual, right? Own self or of pleasure of self, right? So egoistic hedonism has to deal with the pleasure of self, right? So in today's world, why, whereas altruistic hedonism is basically deals with the concept of greatest happiness of greatest number, right? It basically deals with the concept of greatest happiness of greatest number. It is very much utilitarian in nature, which is mainly concerned about the community or beyond individual, right? This is altruistic or altruistic hedonism. So by the term itself, altruistic means the taking into the consideration the interest of the community, the others as well, right? So it will propound the idea of greatest happiness of greatest number. But the dilemma here is that in world today, it is the concept of egoistic hedonism is being dominated, right? People are more egoistic, hedonistic in nature. They are more self pleasure seeker than the what, taking into the consideration the interest of the society or community, right? And that is why several problems is being resulting into, right? We are seeing a war in Russia versus Ukraine, right? Why? Because for the satiation of the interest of the self, that is acquisition of a territory, right? So this is what is dominating in today's world sphere, right? Most Western countries are being driven by the sense of egoistic hedonism, and that is why several problems, even the mental health problem of depression, anxiety attacks, and etc., are being resulting into or being consequence, right? So this is a difference between egoistic hedonism and altruistic hedonism, right? And when we talk about the consequence, teleology, and result, we will always have to take into the consideration the altruistic hedonism, right? So let's say if a question asked what is happiness means to you, right? So if we will give more altruistic, if we will propound or advocate the idea of altruistic hedonism than egoistic hedonism, then it will always add value, right? Being an individual, there will always be a sense of egoistic hedonism is also within us, right? हम एक इंसान है एंड हमें एक सेंस ऑफ सेल्फ हमेशा होता है, एक सेंस ऑफ ईगो विल ऑलवेज बी देयर. But the important here, or the importance or significant here, is that how do you balance it or give the pedestal of altruistic hedonism a upper part than the pedestal of egoistic hedonism? How do you give more priority to altruistic hedonism than egoistic hedonism, right? This is what will create an impact of you being in bureaucracy, right? Because bureaucracy will always support the idea of altruistic hedonism, right? That is why we want to come into the service. Why? Because we want to serve the society, right? And this is what a mentality or psyche of an evaluator or paper setter is, to check what is your perspective when it comes to pleasure or hedonism is, right? So a question asked, right? If I have to show you the question, the question is, all human beings aspire for happiness. Do you agree? So everyone will agree. Why? Because happiness is the utmost goal of human existence. What does happiness means to you, right? So people will easily succumb to the notion that happiness means getting red siren and etc., right? Red siren, bungalow after getting into the post, royal entry and etc., right? So for most people this will be a kind of happiness, right? And this is somewhere true as well. We cannot deny the idea that the interest of the self has also needs to be also taken into the consideration, because this becomes a kind of motivation for all of us. We do need some kind of basic satisfaction or pleasure, right? But our more priority should be over what? Altruistic. Just a second, people. Okay, our more priorities should be over the altruistic. Just a second. Right, yep. So our more priority should be over the altruistic hedonism than the what? Than the egoistic hedonism, right? Egoistic hedonism and altruistic hedonism. Our main emphasis should be upon the altruistic hedonism that propounds the idea of greatest happiness of greatest number, and not over on the egoistic hedonism. There should always be a more emphasis upon the altruistic hedonism, right? So this is the idea behind the concept of hedonism, right? So we have already seen the concept of the types of hedonism basically, right? So my system is not supporting me, people, today. Just bear me for a minute. Okay, so we have already seen the two types of hedonism, that is egoistic hedonism and altruistic hedonism. Egoistic hedonism is basically the pleasure of self, right? And altruistic is basically the pleasure of or happiness of whole, right? Or the greatest happiness of greatest number. Always remember this particular statement. You don't have to write the entire story, just mention this particular idea. They will understand that you are falling in the arena of altruistic hedonism, right, or utilitarianism, right? So if any such situation arises where you have to talk about the idea of happiness, that everyone is aspiring for happiness, do you agree? And if you agree, what does the term happiness means to you? You shall always be give more priority to altruistic hedonism over egoistic hedonism. Taking into for the sake of taking into the consideration the pragmatic aspects of pleasure seeking nature of men, one also have to write egoistic hedonism, right? Like a kind of what can be the example for egoistic hedonism, right? For let's say having a basic salary, right? Having a basic salary to fulfill the need of our family, right? This is very genuine and very much ethical as well. There is nothing wrong in this, right? We need certain basic financial stability, salary to support our family, to support ourselves in time of crisis, right? This becomes egoistic hedonism. But our main aim or main source of pleasure or happiness is greatest happiness of greatest number, right? That is serving the society, and this is how you approach any such situational question, right? So now let's see a very important question which says that can result be source of moral or ethics? Can result be source of moral or ethics? On the ground of result, can we decide the morality or rightness or wrongness of an action, right? The very important question, right? So what do you think? Do you guys have any unique perspective about it? If yes, then leave it in a comment section. I will do give it a read, and we will discuss those perspective in our lecture, right? So the question here is that, can result be source of moral or ethics, right? One school will always say the idea yes, right? The school is none other than the utilitarian school, right? Utilitarian ethical school, right? They will always propound the idea that yes, result can be source of ethics or morality. Why? Because it will be decided on the basis of greatest happiness of greatest number, right? Greatest happiness of greatest number. If there is a greatest happiness of greatest number, then that particular actions are bound to be considered as an ethical or moral, right? But there is always an exception. There is always an exception. What kind of exception? Let's say, for example, okay, let's take into the consideration sometimes right actions, sometimes even right actions can lead to wrong or bad results, right? Sometimes right action can even lead to bad results, right? And if we will see this perspective from utilitarian point of view, then this will be directly immoral or unethical, right? Because it leads to bad results. But here the action was right, the action was wrong, then it will be just to consider this particular action unethical. Why? Because only the action was in control of the individual, right? And despite taking into the consideration the bad result, will it be just to consider that particular action immoral or unethical, right? So this is one exception. What can be the example? The best example is, let's say there is a medical officer, right? He has committed, or he has engaged in a surgery, right, which led to the death of the patient, right? Right? Though his procedural surgery was right, being a district administrator or magistrate, you have to take into the consideration the entire situation into picture, right? So there is a pupil of the patient who has arrived to the court saying that there was a mistake of the doctor. But while judicial scrutiny, the committee has found that no, the medical officer has done his duty judicially, right? He has done his duty justly. So despite having a bad result or unwanted consequences or ramification, this particular action cannot be regarded as what? Unethical or wrong, right? So this is the first exception. What is the second exception? Even sometimes bad actions lead to good results, right? Sometimes bad actions even can lead to good results, right? What is the example? Again, consider yourself or assume yourself sitting in the position of a collector, right, or DM, right? Now we all know about the concept of systematic corruption, which is inherent in the system, right? So if you deny the set or amount of money which is being offered to you as a part of systematic corruption, you know the idea that if you refuse that money, that particular token of money will go to someone else, and they might misuse that money, right? So why not take this money and donate this money for some good cause, some noble cause, right? So though your action of taking this money was wrong, it was is still a corruption. Its end or its result was good. Why? You have donated that money for the good cause of the society. Somebody will get benefit out of that, right? So here even the bad action led to the good result, right? So here we can say that the actions and the results are not directly influenced of each other, right? Even sometimes right action can lead to bad result in case of medical officer, and even sometimes bad action, that is corruption or systematic corruption in case of bureaucracy, can lead to a good result, that is donation, right? So this is how you have to attempt your answer, which says that can result be a source of moral? Yes, result can be source of morality or ethics, which basically is supported by the idea of utilitarianism or consequentialism, which propound the idea of greatest happiness of greatest number. If any action which leads to the greatest happiness of the greatest number or welfare of the society, that action shall be considered as ethical or moral. But there will always be exception, right? Because sometimes even right action can lead to bad results, right? Like in case of doctor, he operated the patient very effectively, very efficiently, though the death of patient has occurred, right? We cannot blame the medical officer because only the action was under his control, not the result, right? And hence we cannot decide on the basis of result the rightness or wrongness of the action of this particular medical officer, right? The second situation is even bad action sometimes can lead to good results, right? What was the example? The engagement in corruption, right? The money the DM taken in order to donate that money for good purpose. Despite the good result, the action was not good, and though he had a good result. So the rightness or wrongness of an action cannot be decided on the result, right? So if somebody has to again make a scrutiny of this particular situation, that yes, donation has come for the welfare of the people, but nobody knew that the from money which is being donated has been extorted from the wrong means of systematic corruption, right? So just by taking into the consideration the result, we cannot decide the morality of the action from where the money came from, right? So this is the whole situation. Yes, result can be a source of morality, but there is always the exception which needs to be taken into consideration, right? I am hoping that you guys are getting the concepts, right? So let's see what does Bhagavad Gita propounds about the idea of result or fruits, right? Results or fruits. So being Indian, Bhagavad Gita is at least one of the greatest legend for me, right? If I have facing even a minor of problem, I always resort to the Bhagavad Gita, right? And here in the pictures you can see how Lord Krishna is propounding to Arjun that, hey Arjuna, be a karma yogi. Hey Arjuna, be a karma yogi. Perform all your actions with the mindset of duty and detachment. Do not be attached to the action you perform, and do not accept the fruit of your actions, right? Why he says such in such a manner that do not expect the fruit of your action? Because the expectations of results shall always accrue you suffering, right? You will always bound your horizon of perspective to the results, right? If you are not getting a result which you expected, if your results are not as per your expectations, you will always find yourself in misery, right? You will always find yourself in misery. You will always find yourself in suffering. And hence when it comes to result, the Bhagavad Gita, the holy legend of our country, propounds the idea of Nishkam Karma Yoga. Hey Arjuna, be a karma yogi. Work without expectation of the fruit. Do not get attached to the expectation expectation of the fruit, right? And hence this concept of nishkama karma yoga comes, right? Why we are learning this particular concept? So as to ensure that any action will be ethical for us, because we are doing that particular action from the nishkam bhav, and hence a bureaucrat shall always strive for the sake of nishkam karma yoga, that I will perform my duty without or irrespective of results that is bound to come, right? That is bound to result. So this is the idea which Bhagavad Gita propounds about nishkam karma yoga, which can be attempted as a great conclusion or supporting remark to the answer, right? That irrespective of happiness, irrespective of pleasure, I will always strive for nishkam karma yoga as propounded in the holy legend of our country, that is Bhagavad Gita, that propounds the idea that be a karma yogi, and perform your duty without expecting any result, right? So this is the idea of Bhagavad Gita's nishkam karma yoga, right? If you guys are having any doubt or any query or any thought in your brain, you feel free to mention that in the comment section, or you guys can also join my Telegram channel. I will mention the link in the description, and there we can have a very fruitful discussion about the concepts or doubt that is emerging in your mind, right? So now let's try to solve this particular questions which I have already discussed in a brief, right? So this is a question I think which was asked in 2014, very important question, and concept pertaining to the concept of happiness has been asked frequently in the exam. That is why let's have the idea of framework so that it becomes very relevant to you and you can attempt any answer in similar manner, right? So the first part of the question is all human beings aspire for happiness, right? This is the statement they have given, and they have asked, do you agree, right? And if you agree, then what does happiness means to you? This is basically you have to give the reason why do you support this particular statement by eliciting your idea that what does happiness means to you, right? So all human beings aspire for happiness, nobody can deny this. Why? How can you support this answer? Because as per Aristotelian ethics, Aristotle propounded the idea of eudaimonia. Remember the term eudaimonia, right? That happiness is the ultimate goal of human beings, right? So if you will agree to this answer, how can you support this answer? By saying that yes, I agree to that statement because as per Aristotelian ethics, eudaimonia is the supreme or ultimate goal of human existence, right? It is the ultimate goal of what? The human existence, right? So as we all know that all the activities are mankind in the pursuit of happiness, right? Whatever we have as we have already discussed in the concept of hedonism, that whatever we do for the sake of pleasure, right? Or happiness. we do for the sake of happiness, right? We do for the sake of happiness. This is the second support which you can give. You can mention the Gandhi ji, very important, right? Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do, are in harmony, right? This is when you can get the idea of happiness, right? So all these important personalities are supporting the idea of what? Happiness, right? And hence nobody can deny that no, all human beings do not aspire for happiness. We all aspire for happiness, because even the Nicomachean ethics talks about the concept of eudaimonia, which says that the happiness is the final pursuit of human existence, right? And as per the idea of consequentialist or utilitarianist, human beings are driven by the concept of hedonism, right, which propounds the idea that men work for the sake of what? Men work for the sake of pleasure, and they ought to resort to the work which accrue them the greatest happiness or pleasure, right? As per Gandhiji, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony, right? And hence we all aspire for the happiness. This is how you support your answer that yes, I agree. Then the second part of the question is you have to justify by saying that what does happiness means to you, right? If you are saying that yes, all human beings aspire for happiness, what do you agree? Yes, you are agreeing. Then you have to support your answer by saying that what does happiness means to you, right? So here the paper setter wants to see your perspective, whether your notion of happiness is limited or it is something universal or eternal, right? So here again you can talk about the concept of, as I've already discussed, the concept of hedonism, right? As hedonism is of two types, that is egoistic hedonism and altruistic hedonism, right? Altruistic hedonism, right? So here you have to take a practical notion by saying that yes, even the personal aspirations can be a source of happiness, for me, but the truth is it will be limited in nature, and hence my ultimate source of happiness will be altruistic hedonism. That is the greatest happiness of greatest number, right? Greatest happiness of greatest number, which shall always render me immense and eternal happiness, right? Which is my ultimate source of happiness. This is what happiness means to me, that happiness is not just a egoistic hedonism or egoistic or personal happiness. It should be a altruistic happiness or the greatest happiness of the greatest number. And this is how you have to prioritize altruistic hedonism over egoistic hedonism. How you can conclude it in very balanced manner? You can conclude it in very balanced manner by giving a concluding remark of Nishkam Karma Yoga of Bhagavad Gita, right? where you will say that the final source of happiness for me is nothing but the Nishkam Karma Yoga, where my action without the expectation of result will be my ultimate source of happiness, right? This is what happiness means to me, and this is how you conclude your answer, right? And by checking your answer, evaluator will be happy and you will for sure get a more than average marks, right? So if you guys want to more than average, not just average, more than average, at least if it is 10 marker, 7 at least, okay? So if you guys are finding it interesting and if you guys are wanting to attempt an answer, please do attempt an answer and send me your copies by joining my Telegram community, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. I will mention the link in the description, people. So make sure to join this Telegram community and send me your answer script. I will evaluate it and give you a valuable feedback, okay? So with this, we have almost come to a beautiful end for today's lecture. But one thing I want to bring to your notice is that I am getting immensity of feedbacks about you people, that you guys are liking the videos and etc. I am really inundated with all the positivity you guys are sharing with me, and that is what keeping me motivated to continue this with all my sheer love and positivity for all of you people. So let us all hope that we all succeed in this beautiful new year of 2024, and I am wishing you all the very best, okay? Just ensure to show your love by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Geek, and also like the video, right? With this, let's end today's lecture, and always remember the motto statement of UPSC Geek by NRG: as you strive so you thrive. आप जितनी मेहनत करेंगे